रब इश्रह ली सदरी व यस्सिर ली अमरी वहलुल उक़दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम Assalamu alaikum. Surah Araf continues in para 9 with the stories of past nations. The first story is of Hazrat Nuh alayhi salam and his people from verse number 59 to 64. The people of Hazrat Nuh alayhi salam were the first people on earth who did idol worship. In fact, they were the pioneers of this great sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent his prophet to warn the people, but the leaders and the influential people rejected him. Hazrat Nuh alayhi salam told them, I convey to you the message of my Lord and give sincere advice to you, and I know from Allah what you do not know. The leaders accused him of lying and mocked him and continued their evil practices. As a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved him and the believers in an ark, and disbelievers were drowned by a great flood. Next come the stories of Hazrat Hud alayhi salam, mentioned in verses 65 to 72. The people of Ad lived in deserts with lofty pillars and statues. They were arrogant people and had been blessed with great strength from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Prophet Hud alayhi salam called them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone without any partners and to obey and fear him. But the leaders of his nation rejected him and said, You have come to us that we should worship Allah alone and forsake that which our fathers used to worship. So bring us that with which you have threatened us, if you are of the truthful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed Ad due to their shirk and arrogance by a furious, violent wind and saved the believers. The story of Hazrat Salih alayhi salam mentioned in verses 74 to 79. They were the successors of Ad and had built for themselves palaces in plains and carved out homes in the mountains. Their leaders were arrogant and said to the Prophet, Verily, we disbelieve in that which you believe in. They asked Hazrat Salih alayhi salam that they would only believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if he sent a she-camel to them miraculously. And when they finally received their miracle, they killed the camel, and as a result, they were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by a powerful earthquake. Hazrat Lut alayhi salam was sent to some really wicked people, and we can read their story in verses 80 to 83. They were the first homosexuals in the world. For their crimes, 3 kinds of punishments were given to them. One was a terrible scream and shriek. The second was a shower of stones that rained upon them. And the third was that the earth turned upside down for them. No other nation has had this many punishments sent to them at one time. This tells us the severity of their sin, and it should be a cause for us as well, as homosexuality is spreading so much. Towards Madian, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Shuaib alayhi salam. Their crimes were shirk, highway robbery, and cheating. They were destroyed by an earthquake in such a way as if they had never lived. Verses 94 to 102 present a review of these 5 perished nations. The law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that first he inflicts a nation with difficulties so that they may turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he gives them another test, and that is the test of ease and prosperity. If a nation fails in both the tests, then this nation is destroyed. Allah ta'ala tells us in verse 96, and if the people of the towns believed and fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would have opened for them blessings from the heavens and the earth, but they disbelieved. So we seized for them what they were earning. So belief and taqwa are the 2 qualities that make any nation deserving of Allah's blessings. Verse 103 to 137 are about the history of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam and Pharaoh. The story starts with an invitation from Hazrat Musa alayhi salam to Pharaoh to believe in one God, a God who had given astonishing miracles to Hazrat Musa alayhi salam. Pharaoh mistook these miracles for magic and arranged for his own magicians for a showdown with Hazrat Musa alayhi salam. A day for the competition was decided, and Pharaoh himself did all the work of inviting the people from far and away to look at the miracles. When the competition started, the magicians realized that which was with Hazrat Musa alayhi salam was no magic, and they immediately surrendered before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Pharaoh threatened the magicians, but these brave men had truly accepted Islam, and no threat could change their minds. In one moment, they went from kufr to iman, and what's important to note is that as soon as they realized the truth, they acted upon it and stood in front of the most powerful man of that time. Pharaoh, in order to punish the Bani Israel, gave the order to have all the baby boys killed. Hazrat Musa alayhi salam reassured his people and told them, Seek Allah's help and be patient. Indeed, the earth belongs to Allah alone. He grants it to whoever He chooses from among His servants. The ultimate outcome belongs only to the righteous. In order to test him, the Pharaoh and his people were afflicted with several plagues. While in hardship, they promised to be obedient, only to break their promises when they were given ease. Are we too not like the Pharaoh and his people sometimes? Whenever we have some hardships, we too promise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if this problem goes away, then we will be better Muslims. But when we are given ease, we too forget about our promises and go back to our earlier lifestyles. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all firm believers. Ameen. Eventually, we learn that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala drowned the Pharaoh and his followers, and a weak nation like the Bani Israel were given power. And why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do that? Because the Bani Israel endured all the oppression with patience. Verse 138 to 156 tells us the next part of the story. It highlights the crimes of the Bani Israel after they had been rescued from Pharaoh. They demanded an idol to worship, and later they started worshipping a calf in the absence of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam. In the next ayah, which is verse 157, the Bani Israel have been advised to take lesson from their own history and have been told to follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a prophet whose description has been given in their own books as well. Verse 159 to 162 mentions the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the Bani Israel and their disobedience. The 12 tribes of Bani Israel were blessed with 12 springs of water. They were shaded with clouds. They were given manu salwa for food. And when the time came for them to do something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they disobeyed. The Quran is a book of reflection, and you and I need to check ourselves when we read these verses. We have also been blessed. Can we even count the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We can't even comprehend the mechanisms of our own bodies. Yet, when our all-powerful Maker commands us to do something, we give excuses and disobey Him, right? Verse 163 to 166 tells us the story of the fishermen who had been ordered to obey the command of Sabbath. They had been prohibited to do any work on Saturdays and to keep that day only for worship. They were tested in a way that the fish could be seen playing at the surface on Saturdays, and all other days the same fish would vanish. They devised a scheme to go around Allah's order. They would lay out their fishing traps on Fridays, and the fish that visited on Saturdays were caught in the traps. The rest of the villagers who did not participate in these acts were divided into two groups. One group disapproved of the actions and warned the evildoers, but the second group remained silent. Finally, a curse fell upon the community. Only the ones who were commanding right and forbidding evil were spared. This story teaches us that we should not only do good ourselves, but we must also encourage others to do it as well. Wasn't this the mission of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Didn't he live his entire life commanding good and forbidding evil? We know this famous hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said, "Whoever amongst you sees an evil, let him change it with his own hand. And if he is unable to do so, with his tongue. And if he is not able to do so, then is with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith." Verse 172 is a reminder of the famous covenant that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from all of us. Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? And all of us replied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that yes, we testify that you are indeed our Rabb. This confession is like a built-in program in all of us, that we are automatically inclined towards goodness. Isn't it a reality that we are at peace when we do activities that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that is a big blessing from our Rabb. Verse 175 to 177 warn us by telling us the story of a man who had turned away from the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even when he knew that they were true. This person had the knowledge of the deen, but he had become the victim of shaitan's trick. How? Because the shaitan could sense that he desired the pleasures of this world. We need to understand that the love of this deen and dunya cannot reside in the same heart at the same time. Enemy like the shaitan, who is on job 24/7, is always on the lookout to see when the love of the dunya overweights the love of the akhirah in our heart. And that is the moment that he makes us slip. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our iman so strong that we are able to defeat the shaitan. Ameen. In verse 179, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the people whose only purpose in life is to eat, sleep, socialize, and entertain themselves as cattle. Isn't that how animals lead their lives too? They don't have a higher purpose in life. Verse 180 teaches us to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His beautiful names. We should also learn these names and understand them, so we also know the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Verse 204 teaches us of the manners of listening to the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "So when the Quran is recited, listen carefully to it and keep silent so that you may be shown mercy." Now let's come to the next surah, which is Surah Anfal. This surah was revealed in the 2nd Hijri after the Battle of Badr. Anfal means the spoils of war. And this surah mainly deals with the topic of jihad in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right in the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the qualities of true believers. He says, the believers are only those who, when Allah is mentioned, their hearts become fearful. And when his ayat are recited to them, it increases them in faith, and upon their Lord they rely. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase our imans. Ameen. Their other qualities of believers are that they establish prayer, and from what we have provided them, they spend. We need to check ourselves. Do we have these qualities within us? If yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those are the believers. Truly, for them are degrees of high positions with their Lord and forgiveness and noble provision. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us in verse 20 and 21. O you who have believed, obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not turn from Him while you hear His orders. And do not be like those people who say we have heard while they do not hear. How is it that someone hears yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they have not heard? Because it isn't possible that someone hears the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the worlds, and yet they don't act upon what is being said to them. So hearing here does not mean to hear, but to obey as well. That is what's required from all of us. Next in verse 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and know that your wealth and your children are but a trial, and that Allah has with Him a great reward. Let's look at different scenarios how our wealth and children can be a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may never bless you with wealth and children, or He may bless you with wealth, but you use it in haram ways to please your children. You might have children, but they are not good to you, or are not good Muslims. He may give you both, but then take away during your lifetime. This is a great reminder that wealth and children are not yours. You have only been entrusted with their responsibility. When a person faces this huge trial and his wealth or children are taken away, then that person might complain and grieve in such a way that he utters words of ungratefulness and could even lose their faith. So we should always make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us steadfast on His deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep our children on the straight path, and may we always earn and spend our wealth in a halal way. Ameen. Next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that only the people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be given Furqan. What is Furqan? It is the ability to distinguish between false and truth, between right and wrong. If we fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enable us to make the right decisions. Our inner self will guide us on every step and tell us which path leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and which leads to shaitan. This brings us to the end and to the question I'm going to ask myself today. And the question is, do I only turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when I'm facing difficulties, or do I turn towards Him in ease and in happy times as well? Inshallah, we will meet again tomorrow with the next para. Allah Hafiz.